Hello, everybody. I'm here with my dear friend Jen Hewson.
Yeah.
Am I pronouncing that right?
Hewson.
Hewson.
Yeah.
So I've asked Jen to be on the podcast here today because I've been watching some of the posts you've been making on social media and capturing a little tiny bit of your story.
Mm.
And I thought you're a person that I should get in front of and gather a little bit of story from you. So Jen has an interesting story. In 2017, she developed breast cancer.
Mhm.
And that journey for her, the first leg of the journey, she was using Western medicine and getting sicker and sicker in the process. And then there was a pivotal point in that journey that she decided to take her life into her own hands and to look into some alternative therapies, which then led you into starting a career in health and wellness. Now, her credentials, she has a laundry list of credentials. You want to just skim through that for us quickly?
Oh boy, I haven't reviewed them in a long time. Well, it started out with relational trauma counseling. So I really, I really looked at, well, what do I need to do? Well, and I was always just one step ahead. I think in my years as a teacher, I was always that, okay, if I don't know this, I'll just learn just ahead of them, and then I can bring it and help others too. So I did relational trauma therapy. I did a tapping course. I did a holistic health practitioner certification. I did PMF training, Rife therapy training. Um, there's a lot in there. I was sort of just, okay, everything that can help me that could then maybe help others with where I was at emotionally, mentally, and physically. I did a little bit of QHHTP stuff. I did, it feels like a lifetime ago. And then I met someone that did the electrodermal acupressure testing that I do now. And they kind of initially took me under their wing. And then I just went off and practiced. I sort of did what in the doctoring world would be an internship, right? Um, so that's kind of the early parts of training that I kind of was looking at.
And when I looked into your story, I thought this is the perfect person to get sick because it seems like it lit a fire under your butt and it actually spun your life in an entirely different direction. So today we're getting together to talk about the power of story. So what was your story moving into your being sick, and what was your story after you became well?
Okay, wow. So I think for 40, I was just in my 44th year when I got sick. And I think for that whole time, I'd had this story of victimhood, right? That the things that happened to me when I was a child, which was traumatic, physical, mental, emotional abuse for 10, 12 years of my whole childhood till I left home at 13, that I carried that as this almost like a trophy. It was like, well, I'm this way because, or I've done this because that happened to me. And really, what I had is all that repression of sadness, anger, bitterness in my body that turned into this disease called breast cancer, right? And so that's the story I had of, I would say if I had to encapsulate it, it would be, I'm a victim.
Mm-hmm.
Poor me, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that when I had my 2-year dark night of the soul night, it wasn't a night. What God showed me, because it was really through spirit and through the power of prayer, is that I'm more than that story, that I have new stories to write, and that that my story and that who I was born to be with my purpose was way too important to stay in that brokenness. So, I would say that it was definitely a 360 and in a really short time.
Yeah.
Right.
And when we look at the traditions and spirituality, it's chocked full of story, and they preserve these traditions with story. And so that's telling us something. If they preserve history with stories, then what are we preserving in us by the stories that we carry in our mind, the stories that we tell ourselves repeatedly, day in, day out? We never get tired of our stories. I'm sure all our friends do, but we don't. And
Yeah.
so what are we preserving in us, when we carry these stories? And like you're saying, you are preserving this sense of being a victim.
Right. Well, what, in hanging on to, I think it's just awareness, right? Like we have to take time with ourselves. I'm reading your beautiful painting on the wall, to sit quietly until the silence becomes a love song in you. And I think when we sit and we hear the neurotic talk that our brain and minds can do, I followed a lot of Michael Singer's work, and thinking about that, how neurotic our minds can be, and that it's just a mind. We are not the mind. We must master the mind, right?
Yeah.
Through getting back into our bodies and into our hearts, into the soul. So I think, for those that, for where I was 9 years ago, 9 years ago, I had no awareness of that. I had no mentors. I know that I had one all along. I just wasn't listening to that other voice, that I'll call the voice of God, that is inside me, right? And so, it would be that awareness of like, okay, what is this repeated, broken record saying to me about, what I look like, how people see me, how I'm not enough, whatever those stories are. Mine were usually, self-deprecating, self-loathing, never about others. Like mine was never the critic, the inner critic is fully directed at me. I'm not really critical of others. But now I have that awareness, and then I can see it. It's like, oh, there you are again. And instead of, listening to it, I just give it a, okay, you're there again. And sort of, it goes away a lot faster, right? It's like, I don't have to stay stuck in that movie rerun anymore that I did for that many years, right? But that took getting quiet enough so that I could hear just how noisy it was up there.
Yeah.
And it was loud.
Yeah.
And sometimes mean and nasty. And now the stories are much different, right? There's new stories, new tracks daily that come in. So, and I'm just grateful for that. But it's not to say that those old stories don't like to come back, right? The subconscious is very powerful. We store a lot of things in that back brain. And we can be triggered by a smell or the name of a person, or a familiar sight or scene that can bring back those kind of other stories, right? Just like fond memories and stories can come back.
That's right. And when memories arise in us, there's a story that we can unpack all around that. And I found with me, my stories would create more stories. It would create needs, made up needs in myself, because my story was one where I was a victim at one point. Then I created the story that I needed to feel in control. I needed to dominate other people because I felt dominated in my life, and I couldn't overcome that story because I thought, if my old story is this, then my new story is going to be that. And I was leaving one prison for another. And that's the problem with creating stories from your story. And I think that makes up a good portion of what we think is our personality, is the story that comes out of your story, and how much truth is there in your story? And if you look at this moment here right now, how much truth are these old stories It's not happening right now.
Right.
Right now is a point in which we can jump off
Right.
and create a story.
So true. Wow. I really relate to what you just said
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like in some ways I'm undoing the story that replaced the story
Yeah.
at this very juncture in my life. I would
Mm-hmm.
say in the last probably year,
Yeah.
right? And it was one of, well, if I can control my life, right? That illusion of control, I'll just get more education. I'll be even more successful. I'll do this. I'll hold all of this. I just see myself as this. It's like this cat in the hat character that was like, no, I can do it. Look at me. I did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I replaced the lack of worth with getting to the top of this sort of proverbial mountain of success,
Mm-hmm.
and got there and went, I'm miserable, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because it wasn't in a place of surrender. So I think that that's really powerful that you just said that, because it's exactly where I feel like I'm headed, which is into this unknown. It's scary for me because I think a trauma response in life can be to want to control things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through creating a story that we think is our story.
Yeah.
But letting go and just allowing, allowing God, allowing source energy to just flow us into where and what and who we are in every moment is freedom,
Mm-hmm. You
right?
said something there, letting go.
Yeah.
This is a common theme that will come up when we're healing, growing, reaching into empowerment. Letting go is always in that framework. Now, how do we let go? Now, from my estimation, is a radical acceptance of what is. For me, that's the first step. It, how can I let go of things that I can't accept? And that was what kept my stories in place, is because I didn't accept the fact that these things happen. There was a small me, a little me involved, and it said, "Why me?
Right.
Why would they do that to me?" And so that made me hang on to these old stories so tightly, because there was a me that was wounded.
Mm.
But when the bigger sense of me said, "You know what? Yeah, that happened. That sucked. I accept that." It's like I drew a line in the sand that I could move forward from.
Right.
How Now that's sort of my entry point into letting go, which is, again, this is a theme that's going to continually come up in your life. To move forward, we have to let go of what holds us back. So how, from your estimation, how do we let go?
Wow. Well, I think for me, letting go, I go back to my spiritual practices, which is to just trust that I'm loved, that I'm taken care of, and that whatever lessons and plans that my God, my Creator, has for me, that it's meant to happen, and just to allow it to. And that's just having complete trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trust that my needs will be met. Trust that, and it doesn't mean just fully letting go. There's still actionable steps. I still have to, I show up at work. I do the things, but letting go of kind of, I guess, control of what the outcome is,
Mm-hmm.
detaching from it, right? Like, okay, this might suck. Okay, but that's okay, right? What can I learn through that?
Mm-hmm.
Or instead of wanting to control an outcome or a feeling or a story or a place that I need to go. So I would say for me, it's about trust and trusting in something bigger than me, but that is also me.
Yeah.
And that comes back to that belief of believing in me, but also believing that I'm supported, period. Because I think, my old stories, that victim story was a whole lot. It's interesting since I've been on this last year or so journey is to suffer with like massive like neck pain, shoulder pain. That's carrying the weight of the world, right? Feeling unsupported. And as I've been stepping into and continue to step into of this surrender and let go and just, right, not let go of that control piece. I don't hurt. My neck doesn't hurt. I'm not running to the RMTs and doing all the things all the time. So it's quite, it can show up in the body too, right? Of when we're kind of hanging on tight. And I know there's more work to do, but I would say, to answer your question, I would say trust. And for me, it's through my spiritual connection and just knowing. It's a knowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I see a lot of people in these times that they put more faith in their mind than they do their spirituality or their heart. You know, like I'm not saying we all need to be spiritual or we need to be religious or any certain way. But when there's no faith involved at all in our lives, and wherever you get that faith, and a lot of people will tell me they get it from nature, great source.
Yes,
because
beautiful.
you know God's always speaking, and He speaks louder in nature because it's just so much more palatable for me, and I think a lot of people. But faith is such a powerful component that I feel is missing in the world today. You know, and there is a lot of stories caught up around spirituality and religion, and you know, if you can let go of all the stories in your head about these things and sort of dive into it a bit more, or lean into it, there's so much that will, you know, rise up and support you. And that's been my experience with my faith, is that, you know, I don't go around quoting scripture. I'm not a Buddhist. People think I'm a Buddhist all the time. I'm not any one religion. My religion is love. Love is my guru. And I have faith because what I've discovered through living my life in love. You know, but whatever gets you into a more faithful place, I think that's a strong message that people need to hear today.
I do too.
You know, and so when we look at stories, and we look at, they can be powerful and empowering, and they can be equally disempowering. What are your thoughts about how stories can empower?
Wow. Well, I think, even talking to you off camera today, like just that power of listening to story can really inspire, right? We can aspire through being inspired from someone's journey through life and what they've learned and the lessons and the hardships and when they came out the other side. That can really, I get that a lot with people I work with in the clinic, kind of patient to doctor stuff. But I try not to. There was a time when I try not to bring too much personal, but when it's the right time to share that story, to sort of lift someone else up so that they feel like they can do it, right? To have that belief in themselves. I think that's an opportune time, and that we all have important stories. We all have things that are inspiring. We don't have to be, we don't have to be the somebody, the so-called somebody, to do that. I mean, I've been inspired by people I've met in coffee shops that, and people that are on the streets, right? Like that it recently happened with a fella named Pat that just knocked on my window in the parking lot at Tilsonburg, where my clinic is. And anyway, I ended up letting him in my vehicle. He's really disheveled, didn't smell too friendly. Got him to a shelter in Woodstock because they wouldn't take him in Tilsonburg. And just listening to his story of what he'd overcame. And so I talked to him a little bit about mine, right? And we talked to him about, I said, just keep praying. Right? Well, what is that? I said, it's just talking to just pray. I said, when you put that out, I said, it's like a signal. It's like your antenna. It's out there. And the more you do it, the more authority you'll have within that realm to ask or to be grateful or to demand or whatever it might be. And he left crying, right? So, but he inspired me. Like what he had been through in his 24 years made my victimhood look like nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can all be bearers of that, those pieces that inspire and empower others through that example.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's example, right? Being that example. And even sometimes the example is what maybe we shouldn't have done, right? But what we learned through that experience of, the fork in the road, and maybe we took the road less traveled, or maybe we didn't. Yeah. I think.
And then any final concluding thoughts to wrap up this session about stories?
Wow. Just really to bring an awareness to what is the story you're listening to? What does your record say to you every day? Because when that record, is playing over and over in the mind, if it's not empowering, it's disempowering. And then it's not only just hurting you, but it's really not helping any of us. It's not helping their family. And we're all connected to that. Mm-hmm. Right? So just really pay attention to it and, give it an awareness and maybe sit with it and discover where those messages or stories came from. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the piece. That's where that's where the gold is. It's in that dark place where maybe it came from. So that's kind of the beginning, I think, of where I started.
And if your stories are a record that plays in your mind, the longer that we play these stories, the deeper the groove gets.
Yes.
And the more readily we fall into these grooves of our stories. And each time that we have a bit of consciousness where we back up from the story and rise above, it's like we throw a little dirt in the hole, and the groove in the mind is not so deep. We don't fall so deeply into these stories. And the key for me has been, as someone who's been trapped in my stories all my life, I just keep throwing dirt in those holes, those grooves I've bore into my mind. And now I find that when the story comes up, there's no hole to fall into, that I just keep moving forward beyond the story. And my concluding thoughts would be that there's powerful stories that are written in our hearts that have yet to come to pass in this physical, what seems to be time. Mm-hmm. There's stories in you that are way beyond your wildest imagination. And I think the most powerful thing we can do is to listen to those stories at the depths of our heart, at the stories that arise out of our soul, the story in you that God placed into us before we ever came into this physical place. Get really interested with what's going on around you in this very moment, because in this moment there's a story, and there's a story that you're either catching or missing. There's so many stories that surround us, and the greatest story of life is the one that's happening right now, the story that's landing at our feet.
Amen to that. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, that was a fun chat.
I think we'll do this again if you're open to it. There's some topics that I'd love to explore with you.
Yeah, I would love
kind
that.
Of go back and forth.
Yeah, be great.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Hope you enjoyed our story.
Yeah, it was fun.
Take care and goodbye.